When I was a child, not even a teen yet, I was taken from my family. My mother had too many children, and I was the oldest. There is a chance that she sold me to support my siblings, but I would like to believe that the men who dragged me away from my home threatened her, and the choice wasn't a choice at all. For the next 10 years of my life, I lived on fishing boats, very rarely going ashore. That happens fairly often where I was born. Because of big fishing ships taking everything, locals needed to go further and further out, trying to get the scarce food to feed their families. Eventually, corruption rotted the fishing trade, so thoroughly every aspect of it was toxic. I believe if you start digging, you can find this information fairly quickly. But no one wants to dig. No one wants to know the cruelty that goes into the fish fingers they feed their child when they're too tired to cook a real meal. Large fishing ships destroy the seas. What they don't keep, they kill. The smaller fishing boats that treat their unwanted catches slightly better are run by crime organizations and human slaves. I was one of those slaves, but I've seen how others were treated. I did not have my freedom, but on the boat, I was treated almost like a human. I bounced around at first, before remaining on that boat for 5 years. It was a decent size. It could carry 20 men, but that trip we had an extra 10. Those 10 were going to be transported to an island, and then scattered to other fishing boats. We had only been on the sea for a few days, but with the cramped living spaces and heat of the year, everyone was in a hot temper. Our captain could be a cruel man. If you got sick, it was cheaper to toss you into the sea instead of getting treated. On that trip, his brother, N, was on board. I met him often while I worked on the boat. His brother was cruel in a different way. He did everything the captain did, but he made you still like him afterwards. As much as I wanted it, I could not entirely dislike the man. He spoke to me like an adult, and at times shared fresh fruit with the crew. I suppose it was to keep us somewhat healthy when they couldn't afford to buy a new worker. If you could do anything, go anywhere, what would you do? Anne asked me one day, leaning on the railing and looking off into the sea. I only know how to fish, I answered back, not pausing in my work. N was like that. His kindness always had a motive behind it. He asked some of the others he had on the boat the same sort of questions. One boy answered, telling truthfully of his dreams. N quickly got into the boy's head, and found out that the boy and another man had a plan of escaping the boat. I never saw either of them again. I only hope that they were sold somewhere else, and not dumped overboard. The last time on that boat, N approached me again, trying to get me to open up about how the men were feeling. I knew he only wanted to know if a mutiny was brewing, due to our poor conditions. How long have we known each other? 5 years? You've grown so much, it's almost like you're our own child. How about you come up to the captain's room for a cold drink? Heat is going to kill someone today, and I would like it if you lived till tomorrow. N was smiling at me, fully expecting me to agree. I knew his plan and wanted to dislike him for it, but he made it impossible. No, thank you. I'll be fine. The captain would be asleep, trying to avoid the heat, so I was at no risk of him giving me a hard time. But if others on the boat saw me getting close, or saw any kind of favoritism, my life would become difficult. I saw N's face drop only a little. Even after all the years, he still thought he was able to charm me. Still, I wish the wind would pick up. At this rate, we'll have to add an extra day to our trip, N commented. For a few hours, the wind had been calm, then stopped altogether. Without the wind to cool us down, we would be too overheated to work the boat and required some rest. Because some men were promised to others, the captain had to care about their well-being. I only nodded in agreement, with N staring at me. He planned on getting into my head, but gave up for that day. He would offer a different man the cold drink, to try and get an inside look on how the crew was feeling. After he left me to my work, the oddest thing happened. Something I had never seen on the sea before. A fog rolled in. We saw it coming and tried to get the boat moving to avoid it, but it just swept in at an unnatural speed. I had, of course, seen fog on the ocean before, but never without a difference in temperature, and never so fast in the middle of the day. I was on the deck when it happened. I stared off, trying to see anything in the dense mist. N had come out on deck, looking as confused as the rest of us. "Is that an island? Are we off course?" he asked, his calm voice breaking. I could see a darker mass that did look like some sort of land off in the distance through the mist, but we should not have been near any land. It was not another ship. The shape was all wrong. It had to be an island, even though I had no idea how we could have gotten so far off course. "We'll just wait out this mist and see where we are," I said, trying to keep working even though my hands were shaking. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't just the mist, but the strange nature of it that unnerved me. I was so busy trying to stay working, I didn't notice a different man go to the railing of the boat and peer down into the sea. I didn't know his name. It was easier on a person not knowing the names of the people who passed through. "There's a person down there," he shouted, panicked. I got up and rushed over to try and see what he was pointing out. N came over beside me, and we all looked down, spotting a pale form in the water. It was hard to see through the mist. As we were straining to see, another form came up. This one darker and easier to see than the first. Then another. Then another. Soon, the ship was surrounded by human-shaped forms bobbing in the water. "Did a ship crash?" the man asked, his voice dry and shaking. I was frozen by the sight of it all. Breaking out of my shock, I ran over trying to find anything to toss out to try to save these people. If they could be saved. I was away from the railing when I heard the sound. I expected screaming or pleading from the people in the sea, but it wasn't that. It was a pleasant sound. A sound of voices mixed in with some sort of wind instrument I had never heard before, and never heard again since. My stomach turned into a ball of excitement. It fluttered with the music that surrounded the boat. I saw the other men on board trying to find the source, their faces unable to be seen through the mist. Then I heard the first splash. Forgetting the strange, pleasant feeling, I turned my head just in time to watch a man jump over the railing. And then another. I saw N's form, and rushed over to pull him away, just as his body was starting to move, trying to get off the boat. He thrashed in my arms, yelling at me, pleading to let him go. My years of hard labor made me stronger than him. If I could tie him down, I could move on to the next person trying to save them as well. I regretted I could only help one person at a time, and I didn't know why I was trying to save N first. He was the only man I could even remotely consider a friend, even after all the horrible things I had seen him do. As I was trying to save N, the men rushed to the railings, jumping off, shouting that they heard their wives singing. For the unmarried ones, they were excited, shouting about hearing female voices, and how they could see such attractive young women in the ocean, just waiting for them to be saved. It was all happening so fast that I almost ignored what N was shouting. "My daughter, she's out there. Let me go. I have to get to her. I knew she wasn't dead. I just knew it. Her mother was lying. I didn't harm her, so let me go." My shaking hands were having trouble holding the rope. I was able to get N tied down, but stopped when those words sank into my mind. The other men were jumping out in lust, completely overtaken by the song. They were seeing the women they loved, or just women they could love. And yet N was shouting about his daughter. The look in his eyes and how he struggled to be free nearly made me sick. I didn't confirm my feelings. I didn't need to. Everything had happened so fast. By the time I let N go into the sea where he belonged, the rest of the men had rushed out, leaving it impossible to save anyone. There had been innocent people on that ship, but I wasted my time trying to save the one man that committed a crime so horrible in his past I could not let myself think of it. I just let him go, and watched him in his glee as he jumped off the side without any hesitation. I knew I was alone, but I still heard the song. Standing in the middle of the deck, looking out at the bobbing shapes, I still felt a fluttering in my stomach, but not the same pull the other men had. I stood waiting for something to happen, and I think the source of the song was also waiting. It knew I was still on the boat, so it sang, trying to lure me to the sea with the rest. Slowly, I walked over closer to the railing to look out, but not to jump like the rest. In the water, the human shapes had their heads peeking above the surface, singing to me, but nothing else. I didn't see any signs of the crew in those waters. Eventually, the song stopped. I think whatever was making it knew I wasn't going into the sea. Suddenly, the boat rocked, as if something massive had just passed beside it, or underneath it. I watched as the human form started to move all at once. Some came out of the water a bit more, and even through the mist, I could see they were only the upper half of a human. Long hair covered their faces, and limp arms moved with the sea. Their bodies formed into a long, thick, rope-like mass that disappeared under the water. They all moved as one as they started to leave. I couldn't shake the feeling, the image that those bodies were all connected to some unseen mass deep in the ocean. Those bodies were like the lights on anglerfish, the song making their prey see those fake bodies as whatever they wanted to see. I was left alone with the boat on a silent ocean. The mist faded, leaving me with the horror of what had just happened. I sold the boat and used the money to get as far away from the ocean as possible. No one knew how, but they thought I had killed everyone aboard. I couldn't tell them the truth, even if they believed me. I would still be killed for selling the boat to a rival gang. I've thought about why I was spared. Those men heard something that made them lust enough to jump out into the sea. And that was the reason why I was spared. I never thought about it at the time. I had no time to think about it while working on those ships. But I've never had such desires. Even after I gained some freedom, I never found myself having the urge to get in a relationship with anyone. I don't think that creature had ever encountered something it could not lure out, and thus had no idea how to deal with such a situation. I've also been thinking about what that thing was. I think overfishing is the reason why that thing had come to the surface. Without its food source, it's trying to find the next best thing. The ocean is deep. We don't know what's under the waves. And I pray we never find out. Hey guys, story number 2 is a fun one today. If you're enjoying today's video, I hope you'll subscribe, leave a quick comment below. I was just looking the other day and saw that almost half the people who watch the channel aren't subscribed, so please, if you enjoy my videos, I hope you'll take a quick second just to hit that subscribe button. Okay, now on to our second story. I don't know how many hours I sat in the poorly lit room, trying to explain that I wasn't a murderer. The officers tried to appear kind by offering snacks or coffee, in exchange for me telling them everything. I hadn't slept for at least 2 days, and my head started to pound. I pleaded again, my hands straining at the cuffs that kept them together. I told you again and again that I didn't know the victim, and I didn't know the group I met with beforehand. I saw some of their posts on a thread discussing mutual interests and saw they were locals, I said, my voice sounding as tired as I felt. A message board for people who are into ghosts, right? Listen, you have no blood on your hands, but you were picked up at the location of a mutilated dead body. If it was the others who killed him, why won't you tell us? Did they pick him out for a reason? Maybe because of his name? Stan Smith? Stan is a good name, you know. Named my son that. The detective said, then trailed off for a second before getting back on topic. With everyone we found, it looked like you guys were doing a ritual, he said, nerves also getting to him. I'd been speaking to this man for hours. His partner left the room for a break, and I had hoped I could get through to him in some way. He said his name was Bouse. I found myself rubbing my temple, trying to keep a migraine away. We were doing a ritual, one that went horribly wrong. I never should have met up with those people. I just wanted to have a fun time over the weekend. I assumed the group wanted to party, but they were all really into any kind of mystic activities. I figured to get to the fun stuff, I would show them a fun little party trick. My head ached away. I should have called my lawyer. But he would just make this whole thing worse. You won't believe me, but what happened to that man was an accident, I started. Bouse leaned in, which put me on guard. He was expecting me to finally admit to a reasonable explanation of why a man was dead when there wasn't one. We were doing a ritual. Summoning Satan and other demons is pretty easy, you know. They want to be summoned, so they don't make it hard. In fact, you can find most of the materials to do so in any household cupboard. I rambled on, hoping to get his attention. Bouse leaned back on his chair, disappointed. The hard plastic chairs caused him as much pain as myself. Whoever designed this room did a good job. The cold gray walls felt as if they were closing in. The other man didn't believe what I was saying, but didn't ask for me to stop talking. He hoped I might slip up and say something useful as I went on. But it's easy to get the summoning wrong. A simple mistake in common ingredients or a slip of the tongue would be enough to cause accidents. I needed to stop. My mind flashed back to what happened that night. My entire body turned cold by the memory. It should have been a simple summoning. I wanted to bring forth a lesser demon that only wanted to have fun instead of taking her soul. But someone got cocky and pushed me aside, trying to bring forth Satan instead. By the time I recovered, he already said the words causing our downfall and killing an innocent man. We didn't have enough power in the summoning for such a powerful request, so yeah, we got Stan instead. At least, most of them. The bad coffee and chips from the vending machine turned my stomach. I needed to cover my mouth to keep it all down. I don't believe in that stuff, you know? Seeing and believing all that, Bouse said, crossing his arms over his wide chest. I wanted to be mad at him, but felt too tired to do so. He looked exhausted and frustrated. I almost felt bad for him. He was stuck in a room with a person making crazy claims. I don't blame him for not believing me. Unless you were in the know with magic, it wasn't something people accepted lightly. This guy just wanted to go home to his bed and his family. I looked at the brickwork, trying to think of some way out of this. I needed a lie that would pin the blame on others, but would also stand up in court. Then an idea came to me. My attention went back to Bouse so quickly that he moved back in his chair slightly. If I showed you, would you believe me? I asked, voice shaking. What do you mean? He asked slowly. I needed to steady my hands. A ball of excitement started in my stomach and I pushed it down. This might just work out for me after all. If we did a ritual, if I showed you how magic works, would you believe me? I offered, pinning all my hopes on that single suggestion. He frowned, shaking his head. But I saw it, a hint of acceptance towards the idea. He didn't want to believe what I said was true, but he wanted to prove I was crazy by letting me fail a ritual. If it doesn't work, I'll say whatever you want me to. I'll sign any statement, I don't care. I'll just need a few things, all of which are harmless. So, what do you say? I asked, leaning forward. He didn't like the crazy look in my eye, but couldn't pass up so easily on closing a case. He shrugged and told me to write down what we needed. Most of the things might already be in the police station. He might need to go to a grocery store for a handful of items, but there were a few that stayed open all night. With the written list, he left me alone, saying he was going to be back shortly. I suppressed a smile. I finally had a way out. What most people don't understand is that Satan isn't really a bad guy. Evil, yet reasonable. I've never personally spoken with the big guy, but I knew a person who did. In exchange for his soul, my mentor became successful in any field he worked in. He knew he would go to hell at the end of his life, but became smitten with the devil himself and almost looked forward to the idea. I could easily summon him and make a deal for my freedom. It wasn't as if I would be going to heaven anyway. Didn't save myself for marriage and a bunch of other little sins a certain other big guy would frown upon. I wondered if Bouse might become collateral damage. That would suck. I didn't overly dislike the guy. He was only doing his job. Bouse came back sooner than expected with the requested items in hand, along with a notepad to write down my confession. He was positive I would be making one. I wanted to tell him this wasn't going to turn out well for him, but decided against it. I looked over what he brought along, surprised by how fast he got the items. I took them from the shared kitchen. It was all there, he said, standing in the corner of the room. I pushed aside the table to make room for the circle of salt in the middle of the floor. The cuffs made the process uncomfortable, but I pushed through. Soon I would be a free man walking out of this damn room. Bouse watched from the corner, making it clear he thought I was crazy. I stayed on my knees, saying what words I needed, and careful to not make any slip-ups. With complex summoning words, it was easy to make a single deadly mistake. Aside from the tongue twisters, the rest of the setup was easy. Some salt here, some offers there, and a drop of blood I got from biting my finger. I knew it was coming, so I stayed on the ground. The lights overhead started to darken as I spoke, causing the other man to start to doubt what he was seeing. Soon the ground under us rumbled, as heat started to flood the room. I felt the sweat on my forehead. A pull came between my chest and the circle in the ground. Something was wrong. This whole thing was off, but I couldn't figure out why that might be. I used the right materials, I'd said the right words. What could be wrong? I refused to stop, finishing up what I needed to say, and waited with a held breath. The rumbling stopped and lights came back on, and nothing else happened for a second, making me think I failed. When what I summoned appeared in the middle of the circle, I knew I failed, but in a way I never wanted to see it again. A body appeared a few inches above the circle and dropped down hard on the cement floor. I gasped, head dizzy at the sight and smell of what was in front of us. Unlike poor Stan, whom we killed through our careless actions, this body looked far too small. At first, I prayed it was an animal. After I saw a bloody leg wearing a footy pajama sticking out from the twisted gore, I knew what happened. I wanted to be sick. My mind internally screamed at the horror of what I had just done. I killed a child, but this should not have happened. I collapsed, my face breaking the circle. In the middle of my panic and dread, I tasted something sweet. The realization of how this mistake happened caused me to sit up. I stared at the box I poured the salt from. The blank box. One that could have easily held sugar if no one thought to check what someone repacked inside of it. My head slowly turned, my eyes landing on the other man in the room. His eyes were so wide I thought they might pop out. A weight came down in my stomach when another realization came. Bouse recognized a detail about this body. It took every ounce of power to ask a very simple question. "What did you say your son's name was?" I asked, voice very weak. Bouse looked down in my direction slowly. His mouth opened for a scream that never came. In fact, he never made another sound again. The sight was enough to make his mind snap. I faintly thought I heard a deep, dark laugh. It might have been my imagination, but I would like to think the big guy saw it as hilarious. Regardless of making a deal with him, I was always destined to spend the rest of eternity under his thumb. And honestly, I deserved it. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/JordanGroupHorror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.